In this podcast episode, financial expert Patrick Boyle joins host Francis and another co-host to discuss the complex factors causing rising costs worldwide, with a focused lens on Britain's current economic struggles. They explore inflation drivers, government debt, energy prices, housing market dynamics, taxation, and geopolitical tensions around the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's war impacts. Patrick offers insights into why simplistic economic solutions often fail and what realistic measures might be needed to address the deep-rooted issues facing the UK and other developed countries. Patrick begins by explaining how inflation surged globally, largely triggered by the COVID-19 lockdowns that abruptly shut down economic activity in March 2020. Governments intervened with massive stimulus payments and bailouts to keep people employed despite the halted economy, effectively paying out for a mostly inactive workforce. This created an enormous economic gap that had to be bridged, but the cost inevitably manifested in high inflation. He emphasizes that while governments delayed the fallout by borrowing, putting it on the credit card, this debt has to be repaid eventually, raising questions about long-term sustainability. Boyle sheds light on the scale of governmental debt, now at record levels relative to GDP in most developed countries, surpassing even wartime peaks. He discusses the political tendency to avoid confronting this debt problem directly, with politicians often kicking the can down the road. Importantly, the rising interest rates complicate matters since servicing this debt becomes more expensive, disproportionately impacting younger generations who will bear the financial burden in the future. The UK's smaller economic size compared to the US also means it faces greater scrutiny and less flexibility in borrowing, causing more acute financial strain. The guest delves into why Britain has been hit harder than many other nations by recent economic shocks. From suffering more during the global financial crisis to being especially vulnerable to energy price hikes due to the Russia-Ukraine war and ongoing Middle East tensions, Britain has borne the brunt of global disruptions. A significant factor in the UK's underperformance is its productivity gap, where British workers operate with roughly half the capital investment per person compared to their American counterparts, lowering overall output. Additionally, the UK faces the world's highest industrial electricity costs, undermining international competitiveness, especially in energy-intensive sectors like steel manufacturing. The conversation turns to the UK housing market, described by Boyle as a central source of economic problems. Unlike Americans who invest across diversified assets, many British people concentrate wealth almost exclusively in property, often because they distrust financial securities. This leads to inflated house prices driven by limited supply, regulatory hurdles, and political reluctance to allow prices to fall, fearing voter backlash. Boyle notes a recent shift where house prices are beginning to drop, but affordability continues to worsen due to stagnant wages and rising interest rates. This creates a perilous situation where younger generations face near impossible barriers to homeownership, fostering resentment and societal division. Patrick challenges popular calls from the left for wealth taxes and tax-the-rich policies, pointing out that such measures would raise far less revenue than hoped and may have adverse economic effects. He explains how punitive taxes can disincentivize entrepreneurship, encourage capital flight, and distort behavior. Wealth taxes cannot meaningfully reduce government debt or solve inequality alone, particularly in an interconnected global economy where capital is highly mobile. Instead, more nuanced tax reforms that eliminate perverse incentives and improve progressivity without killing growth would be more productive. The discussion also addresses rent control, which on the surface seems appealing, but in practice leads to market distortions. Rent control benefits a favored few while discouraging landlords from maintaining or improving properties, resulting in declining housing quality. Boyle draws on examples like New York City, where long-term tenants pay decades-old rents, creating inefficiencies and unfairness. More broadly, he critiques excessive regulation, citing how bureaucratic hurdles inflate costs of infrastructure and housing projects in the UK compared to other countries. Streamlining regulations while protecting standards could stimulate growth and affordability. Turning to geopolitics, Boyle explains how disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil shipping route, have reverberated through global markets. Damage to oil infrastructure and complexities of restarting wells after shutdowns mean that even if tensions ease, supply shortages will continue for years. This prolongs elevated oil and energy prices, which directly fuel inflation worldwide. The UK is especially vulnerable given its expensive industrial electricity and dependence on imported energy, exacerbating economic pressure on businesses and consumers. A less obvious but critical consequence of energy price spikes is the impact on fertilizer production, which relies heavily on natural gas. Europe's preemptive stocking of fertilizer has delayed immediate shortages, but global supply issues remain looming. Diminished fertilizer availability threatens agricultural productivity, leading to higher food prices and potential scarcity, especially in poorer countries that cannot subsidize costs. Boyle warns this could trigger political unrest and social upheaval in vulnerable regions, while even wealthier nations may experience consumer hardship through reduced purchasing power for essentials like meat and other groceries. Patrick highlights a paradox within the UK labor market. Unskilled wages are relatively high compared to other countries, but graduates and professionals see only modest salary gains, leading to frustration among the middle class. This squeezed middle contrasts with improvements in wage levels among the very poor and the extreme wealth growth at the top. Underlying this is the UK's structural problem of low productivity and insufficient capital investment. Boyle stresses that fostering real growth and productivity gains is essential, as neither higher taxes nor increased government spending alone can revive the economy sustainably. The episode touches on the challenge of educating the public about economic realities when political rhetoric often offers oversimplified or populist solutions. Politicians frequently promise fixes with one good trick, but the complexities of balancing debt, growth, taxation, and social welfare defy easy answers. Boyle laments that currently no major government is seriously tackling the need to reduce debt, signaling a looming crisis. Public resistance to necessary but difficult reforms, especially regarding pensions and social benefits, compounds the problem, as history shows attempts to adjust these have been met with fierce backlash. Despite the bleak outlook, Boyle identifies areas for potential improvement, primarily centered on energy policy. Developing affordable and secure domestic energy supplies could reduce costs and boost industrial competitiveness. He advocates for regulatory reform that minimizes obstructive planning processes without compromising safety or environmental standards, using examples like Madrid's efficient metro expansion as a model. Enhancing public infrastructure and reducing commuting costs could also improve productivity. Ultimately, he argues that economic growth must be prioritized to support welfare spending rather than expecting redistribution or higher taxes to provide sustainable solutions.